Audio buffer settings can significantly impact the user experience. So let's look at how to adjust those settings in Ableton Live. So I've got a default set open, and I'm going to go back into Settings, which, if you remember, is under the Live menu on a Mac or the Options menu on a PC. And I'm going to drop down and select the Audio tab. So just for context, you should be aware that the buffer size helps us control the amount of latency or delay that we experience in a program like Ableton Live. And it also has a lot to do with the computer performance that you experience. In fact, the larger the buffer size, the more efficiently your computer is going to work, the more tracks you can have, and the more plugins that you can have on those tracks. But the larger the buffer is, the more delay that there's going to be in the system. So notice that at 256 samples, I have an overall latency amount of 16.9 milliseconds, which is what you get when you add the input and output latency together. Now, if I increase the buffer size to the largest setting of 2048 samples, you'll notice that I'm now at a latency amount of almost 92 milliseconds. So personally, I don't experience much latency at about 128 samples, or maybe even as much as 256. But when I get up to 512 samples, I definitely experience it, and it's really annoying when you're recording audio or MIDI because you play the note and then you hear it. So the general rule of thumb is if you are recording, you're going to want to set the buffer size as small as you can get it. And when you're mixing, you'll want to bump it up as large as you can go, because at 2048 samples, or about 91 seconds of latency, you're not going to really experience that when you just hit play, but you would definitely experience that if you're recording. So a good general rule of thumb is around about 128 samples is a good place to start for recording, and then adjust it accordingly depending upon what you're hearing. For example, when you go really low, you might experience pops and clicks. And you can test that on your system by choosing a low latency setting, or low buffer size setting, I should say. And then you can go down here and you can play this test tone. Now I've got the CPU usage set as high as it will go, and it's going to simulate that at about 80%. So I'll click the test tone. And on my system, which is pretty robust, I'm not really hearing any clicks or pops or dropouts. But you'll want to check that on your system. And again, I would likely set this around 128 samples for recording. And then when I'm not recording and I'm editing and mixing, I'll go as high as I possibly can. So most of Ableton's settings don't need to be changed or adjusted once they're set, but you'll want to adjust the audio buffer size to maximize your recording or mixing performance.